Hello, and welcome to this Deakin University Alumni webinar presented by Dr Gabrielle Fletcher. ZC Moscow here from the Deakin Alumni Relations team. It's great to have you with us. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which we're broadcasting today, the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nations, and to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Today, we're broadcasting from Deakin's Warren Ponds campus, and our webinar topic is Mapping an Innovative Future at Deakin, Indigenous Knowledges and Graduate Learning Outcome 8. Our presenter today, Dr Gabrielle Fletcher, is a Gundungurra woman from the Blue Mountains of New South Wales. She is an Associate Professor in Indigenous Studies and currently the Director of the NIKERI Institute, formerly the Institute of Koori Education. She has previously worked within Indigenous spaces at the University of Newcastle, Macquarie University and Curtin University, and has a background in critical and cultural studies, Indigenous studies and creative writing. Her work examines Indigenous authenticity in post-colonial spaces, mobilising ficto-criticism and creative non-fiction as strategies of encounter. She is increasingly interested in post-humanism and narrativity. Gabrielle is grounded by her experience in Indigenous community and the responsibilities of remembering. Thank you so much for joining us today, Gabrielle. I'll hand over to you.
Hey, thank you very much, Cece. And before I go any further, I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the Wadawurrung people, the traditional custodians of the land, waterways and airways that we're recording on today, and pay collective respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to acknowledge the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, and also the Gunditjmara peoples, who collectively Deakin is on their lands as well. As I am out of country, I also acknowledge Bunjil, the great ancestral creator of the Kulin Nation, other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who may be listening, and acknowledge the diversity and heritage of all of us today. So basically the webinar today, really I'll be looking at the history of the Institute of Koori Education, considering some of its legacy and its context, and considering a little bit, maybe not necessarily explicitly or directly, but the shifting terrains of Indigenous knowledges. And I'm hoping to be showing a video as well, some animation, to unpack not so much ideas explicitly around Indigenous knowledges, but ideas around cosmology and ontology as well. And I'll get to those and explain those a little bit more later on. And really to tie this all up with the importance of community, particularly within the context of a university setting as well. So I'll sort of be doing some framing and discussing frameworks that inform the work that in the particular Deakin is undertaking, looking at some of the Global 8 possibilities and the frameworks external to the university that are actually informing that as well, and just really underscoring the importance of it, but really centering that around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander experience, knowledges, heritage, insight, histories, innovation and creativity as well. Just really celebrating that as well as we move forward together. Okay, so as CC said, introduced me, I'll I think reiterate, just from my own, using my own voice, I suppose, a little about myself. Yes, I am a Gundungurra woman from the Blue Mountains of New South Wales, and as I acknowledged earlier, I am out of country. So I live and work on beautiful Wadawurrung country. I'm an Associate Professor in Indigenous Studies and currently the Director of the NIKERI Institute, which is formerly known as IKE. And as of yesterday, it now has transitioned into NIKERI and into its exciting possibility. I've worked in Indigenous spaces for quite a number of years, inclusive of the University of Newcastle, Macquarie University and also Curtin University. So from a kind of an academic perspective, I have a background in critical and cultural studies, creative writing, social science, that type of thing. as well. But I also had spent a number of years working within community organisations as well, particularly Aboriginal land councils in New South Wales. So I find that for me, that experience of working within community organisations has very much grounded the teaching and learning, and also my research philosophy about the responsibility of remembering and the importance of that, and that it's bigger than self. So why have I sort of made a reference in the slide to positioning myself rather than saying, I'm introducing myself? I mean, I think, in the most obvious and schematic way, it's nice to get a sense of me, the speaker. So perhaps I'm trying to build a sense of relationship, I suppose, through my voice, as the case may be today, and what I have to say. And I think it does establish, levels of credentialing and a kind of micro-history, if you will. But I would have to say, for me particularly, it establishes a level of cultural authority, and I think significantly a relationship to what I am going to say, how I might know this, my own knowledge base, my right to speak, am I better positioned than others, or best positioned than others, as the case may be. And as I had mentioned, I am out of country, and I will sort of explain this a little bit later as we move through together. And I did acknowledge country, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time just talking about why acknowledge country. So it is about situating place and paying respect. So in explaining the acknowledgement of country, I would first need to make the distinction between an acknowledgement of country and the protocol, which is a lot more formal, of a welcome to country. So traditionally, language groups or people that were in language groups would actually cross into each other's spaces, or they may be hosting something, and so it would be a way of welcoming visitors, and then also offering them safe passage and as a protective measure as well around their spiritual being during the journey. So there obviously were not any visible fences or any kind of borders. They were actually introduced as part of the colonising project. So there weren't these clear boundaries, but they were bounded, and that was sort of really kept within a situated place. And I'll talk to that in a minute. So it was the requirement that part of the protocol was asking permission to cross into another group's country as well. So when permission was granted, the hosting group or the group that belonged to that place would actually welcome them and perform some kind of a ceremony as well. And with the understanding and the responsibility and obligation that the protocols and rules and responsibilities of that particular group by a visitor needed to be adhered to and observed and respected. So in short, a welcome to country is, in contemporary terms, is delivered by traditional owners or traditional custodians, or indeed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who have been given very explicit permission from traditional owners or traditional custodians to welcome visitors to their country. So it's very particular. It is about people who provide welcome in a contemporary context and welcome to country that not are just of that place or from that place, but they are in that place. And I hope that that question or that idea might just linger and float for a while, and as we move through and perhaps looking at the video, that might become a little bit more clear to you what that means to be in country. And of country as well. So the distinction between a welcome to country, which is delivered by traditional owners or custodians, and in contrast to an acknowledgement of country, basically is an opportunity for anyone to show respect for traditional owners or custodians and the continuing connection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to country. It can be given by both non-Indigenous people and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But why is it important? Why is both a welcome to country and acknowledgement of country important? Fundamentally because there's a huge socio-historic backdrop, histories and practices of exclusion, separation, removal, erasure. And this has been experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people since the point of colonisation, or indeed before. This history of dispossession and colonisation lies at the heart of the disparity between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and non-Indigenous Australians. So including recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in events, meetings, webinars, etc., is really symbolic, but also a way of being able to be inclusive and beginning to address and look in the eye this exclusion that has been so damaging. So incorporating welcoming acknowledgement protocols or agreements around that into official events, etc., recognises Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first Australians. This is really key, and traditional custodians or owners of land. It promotes an ongoing connection to place of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians and shows respect. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the concept of country is much greater than just a connection to land. And again, I think the video will start to unpack or dimension what country is. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to quote Professor Mick Dodson, who is a very long-term Aboriginal leader in Australia. And he says, when we talk about traditional country, we mean something beyond the dictionary definition of the word. For Aboriginal Australians, we might mean homeland or tribal or clan area, and we might mean more than just a place on the map. For us, country is a word for all the values, places, resources, stories and cultural obligations associated with that area and its features. It describes the entirety of our ancestral domains. While they may all no longer necessarily be the title holders to land, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians are still connected to the country of their ancestors and must consider themselves the custodians or caretakers of that land, of their land. So I think that just really captures in a nutshell and starts to dimension, which I'll address a little bit later as well, this idea of country, that it just moves beyond the idea of land. When I acknowledged the Wadawurrung people earlier in my introduction, I acknowledged land and waterways and airways as well. So sort of composite of all that is within country, not just land, and it's not just the visible, it's also that which isn't visible as well. So I've just popped up a couple of maps on the slide there, and the one on the left is drawn from the IATSIS map, or it's the IATSIS map, which, and it's probably the most current map that's used, and each of the areas that are coloured are actually language groups as well. So each of those areas and each of those groups and those language groups all have their own dreaming, their own totems, rules, responsibilities, obligations, kinship systems and laws, and relationships to all else. There may be some shared cosmologies, and sometimes it is difficult to speak and generalise about Indigenous knowledges or about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, because, again, this is about that knowledge, those practices, those insights, what is known, what is allowed to be known is situated within place, which means from that particular area. And so, again, you're starting to get this sense of people within those areas, you know, as custodians, caretakers who care for country, and the responsibilities are there. The landscape holds knowledge, country holds knowledge, is a knowledge keeper as well. So begin to sort of understand that it's situated and it's particular to that that group. And so to speak generally at times can be, as I said, a little bit awkward, or a little bit, not awkward, but sometimes a little bit challenging, because I'm a Gundungurra woman. My knowledge from that area doesn't transpose to Wadawurrung, for example, and those particularities. There are always divisions between women's business and men's business as well. And it's interesting, just as an aside, that this IATSIS map on the left, showing language groups in Australia, what has come to be known as Australia, was actually drawn from the Tyndale map. And Norman Tyndale was basically the person that was responsible for mapping that. But it's really interesting, actually, because Tyndale sort of was mapping this against, I guess, a Western social construct where he only consulted with the men. And this was sort of done in the early 30s, 40s. So which was really reflective of, the privileging of men in terms of being knowledge holders from one social order, and it was transposed to another. So it is somewhat contested because of this, because it has been, or the Tyndale map particularly was sort of mapped without the benefit of women's knowledge. So it is not necessarily entirely accurate. I mean, certainly there may be some contestation or disagreement between language groups, and of course landscapes have changed, but also in terms of, or within language groups as well, where, for example, what might appear to be bounded may have been a women's sacred site, and it was only meant for certain people, so it would not have been mapped, and that's part of the way of preserving knowledge as well. Those kinds of silences, as opposed to being silenced, but those kinds of silences can be protective as well, just as an aside. So the map on the right is the Aboriginal language groups of Victoria. So I'm just trying to bring that down and drill that down to a little bit more in the particular, given that we are in Wadawurrung country and in the state of Victoria as well. So I don't know how much you can see of that, but if you actually look down to the Geelong area, you'll see that the word Wadawurrung is actually there, and that's incorrect. It's an incorrect spelling. It's actually spelt Wadawurrung, which is Wadawurrung. But, as some of you, or a lot of you may know, often non-Indigenous linguists, anthropologists, ethnographers, or of that ilk, recorded language names phonetically. And so it's all just based upon what they were hearing, what they could hear, what they were thinking they were hearing. So it could be speculative and suggest that the D in Wadawurrung has actually been recorded as a TH. And I think it is spelled from a natural tongue, which means it's probably been spoken more quickly, and so recorded as Wadawurrung rather than Wadawurrung. And this has been sort of quite common, but that's been corrected as more and more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples get into looking at linguistics, but also there's lots of language revival and reclamation that are very much community driven, and it's about actually getting that right. It's very important because language is a bearer of knowledge. Knowledge is a bearer of agency. So there's very much an interconnection there as well. So just in brief, in short, the point here is that the idea is that knowledge is situated, people are situated, country is situated in particular to country. And sort of starting to connect this idea of the situated or placed-based knowledge, practice, and so on, and connecting this to the importance of community as well. So I just wanted to step away from that for a moment and talk about, in the very particular, if you will, a localised perspective around little bit of the history of the Institute of Career Education here at Deakin University. So these sorts of spaces more generally grew out of the landscape of disadvantage that basically occurred through the policies and practices of colonisation and dispossession, as I referenced earlier. And they all they started to emerge around 40 years ago, something like that, variously. And within the context of universities, universities particularly were spaces of exclusion, or education systems generally, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were not even getting to go to university, not even basically finishing school, and there were certainly histories of particular curriculum for Aboriginal girls and then Aboriginal boys separately as well, historically. So universities most definitely have been spaces of exclusion, but spaces of knowledge production, therefore consumption, about, around, through, but never with First Nations peoples. So in the particular case of the Institute of Career Education, the Institute is now in its 34th year. So in 1986, the Institute of Career Education, which is now NIKERI, and I'll speak to that in a moment, began as the Career Teachers Education Program. So it was KTEP, with just 6 students. And the first 4 of these KTEP students graduated in 1989. 1991 saw the formal establishment of the Institute of Career Education. And so this was a partnership between Deakin University and the Victorian Aboriginal Education Association Incorporated, or VAI. And this was about to further enable Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians the flexibility to access higher education while maintaining their family, work and community commitments. And what emerged out of that was a community-based delivery model where it was translated to students would attend campus intensives for 1 or 2 weeks during a trimester, and the rest of the time the support was spent at home so that responsibilities, obligations, commitments and so on could actually be maintained at home. And we still have that community-based delivery model today. 2006 was our first PhD graduate, Dr Linda Ford. 2008, our student residence called Kajara was officially opened. So this provided a very dedicated space for our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students to come on campus, a space where they felt they belonged, and there was a community that emerged as well. So there's lots of different ideas around community here as well. And it allowed students to study and stay on campus in a culturally supportive environment while they're on their intensives, and they're able to come home as well, obviously go back home, feeling that they had been supported and would continue to be supported when they were back in their home community as well. 2012 saw the establishment or the building and the opening of the building that NIKERI currently occupies, and obviously where we're recording from today. So the building was specifically designed to suit Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders' way of learning, with the space designed to become a home away from home as well. There was a lot of consultation that did occur in the lead up to that. And so I think the positioning of the IKE building and now the NIKERI building, the sense of that was that it was going to be central to in the Warm Ponds campus. So, and that's really says something, I think, ultimately about the commitment of Deakin to sort of embed that centrality of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's place, perspectives and knowledges within, if you will, the Deakin DNA as well. So in 2017, we saw our first Indigenous Studies units with IND 201, and then a year later, IND 101, which is an introduction to Aboriginal studies. So these units are designed to share the value of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges, histories, and perspectives. So, and students from across the university are encouraged to take these as electives. And ultimately, underpinning this is the idea of the enactment of change through promoting diversity and cultural understanding. And we are receiving increasing enrolments, particularly through our introduction to Aboriginal studies as well. And it's been taken on by Bachelor of Social Work students as a core unit in first year as well. So it's very much contributing to professional standards as well, and there is increasing possibility around that. So we're really excited. We're in the process currently at NIKERI of developing a minor so that there will be more of the sharing and the valuing and the value add of particularly Indigenous knowledges, histories and perspectives as part of, I think, a broader reconciliation regime, I think, as well. 2019, just to toot the trumpet a little bit here, I think, the Institute of Career Education, as it was known late last year, won the Education Institute of the Year Award in the Dreamtime Awards, which was really unexpected and quite an accolade. And our understanding around that was that it is nominated by, tends to be nominated, these sorts of awards, by alumni and all students. So we felt that that was a wonderful recognition from community of the work and the legacy that has been many people have contributed to over 34 years in the history of IKE. We've graduated over 1,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples during this time, and will continue to be doing so as well. So, in terms of NIKERI, I think, as I said as of yesterday, IKE has now transitioned into the National Indigenous Knowledges, Education, Research and Innovation, that is NIKERI Institute. And we had our official launch yesterday with a really great show from both the Deakin community, but also the broader Aboriginal community as well. It was a wonderful occasion, and I was very pleased to be involved with that. So for us, the launch of NIKERI is an exciting, transformative, evolutionary extension of story and animation and palette and possibility. We're feeling very optimistic. We're collectively reimagining the concretion of place and urgency in a space and in a future that has global reach, but is firmly grounded in local community. So NIKERI Institute is committed to fostering productive and meaningful relationships between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and all other Australians, to shape and co-construct a shared contemporary Australian narrative. And our key strategic pillars are engagement, teaching and learning, student experience, and research. And we're hoping that particularly our Indigenous knowledges, which is really going to be our differentiation as well as other things, but particularly our Indigenous knowledges will and can, and Indigenous knowledges can inform other knowledge systems, as well as increasing access and participation in the Deakin environment that is culturally secure and responsive. So we really do value and acknowledge NIKERI's 34-year legacy of IKE, honouring the past and its past, and we will continue to grow and be enriched, as I've said, by local insight and knowledges. Okay, we flipped one. That's all right. All right then. But I just wanted to make the point. We're just moving on to talk about. I'm just moving on to talk about the fact that we're not existing within a framework. IKE has not existed within a vacuum. Sorry, and NIKERI does not exist within a vacuum either, nor does Deakin, frankly. So I just wanted to focus on a couple of frameworks that continue to inform Deakin and also NIKERI as we move forward as well. This is some of them historic. And the first I've sort of highlighted there is the Berendt Report, and that came out in 2012. It's sort of known colloquially, I suppose, as the Berendt Report. But it was the report of the review of higher education access and outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And it's named the Berendt Report because it was chaired by Professor Larissa Berendt, who is works at Jimbana. I think is actually heads up Jimbana up at the UTS in New South Wales. As well, there have been lots of reports. There's been lots of different things, but I wanted to really highlight this for today's webinar because really it, I think, really significantly highlighted the role that higher education plays quite explicitly in improving health, education and economic outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So basically, the Berendt Report examined the role of higher education in closing the gap and reducing Indigenous disadvantage. And what came out of that was a recommendation around a collaborative approach by government, by universities and by professional bodies to increase the number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, staff and researchers. So some of the key findings of the Berendt Report found that basically the participation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in higher education was significantly below parity with the population as a whole. And the other thing that it did highlight was that it was the commentary was that it was unremarkable that any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people might even aspire to attend university. It presented a vision where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander worldviews and perspectives are valued and contribute to Australia's knowledge base. And the Berendt Report also significantly acknowledged that government can only effect change with the cooperation of universities, professional bodies and communities. And it particularly focused on the role of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff in universities, particularly in academic and research roles, and also focused on addressing existing approaches that may be having an impact on participation and completion by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students as well. NATSIAC is the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Higher Education Consortium, and that's been basically in effect since the 1990s, and significantly NATSIAC is a key advisor to the Federal Minister for Education and Training for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander higher education. It's not quite a peak body, even though we kind of view it a little bit that way. It isn't, but it certainly feeds into Universities Australia, which is a peak body, higher education in Australia as well. So basically, it's an advocacy, a formal advocacy space. I think it has a lot of credibility and credentialing. Very senior people within the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander higher education sector are involved in it. It seeks to progress, elevate and secure past, present and future Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges to influence Western education institutions, many universities, and to increase the availability of higher education for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, and to further develop and grow research and scholarship for and by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So the goals of NATSIHAC are guided by the Australian National Aboriginal Education Policy and very much enshrine the rights of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So in short, its mission is very simple. As members of cultures with the oldest living intellectual and higher order knowledges, NATSIHAC is committed to working with our communities to realise their aspirations. So NATSIHAC actually feeds very directly into Universities Australia. As I mentioned, it's the peak body. And so as a peak body for the sector, Universities Australia, or UA, advocate the vast social, economic and cultural value of higher education and research. So basically UA would provide expert policy, advice, analysis and statistical evidence and media commentary or general commentary around policy practice in higher education. Universities Australia developed their Indigenous strategy for 2017 to 2020. So that will be looking at being reviewed, I imagine, this year with a new Indigenous strategy, education strategy or higher education strategy for next year. So basically, in terms of Indigenous higher education, it really does underpin or reiterate, I suppose, the mission and the goal of NATSIHAC around the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and UA, or Universities Australia, seeks to translate those declared rights into practice, and wanting to ensure that Australian universities are vehicles for social, cultural and economic development of, with and by Australia's diverse Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. UA also acknowledges, I think, in terms of the contribution to Australia's nation building, there's a strong moral obligation to social justice and self-determination for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. There is a recognition, and a very strong recognition as well, of the valuable contribution made by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through knowledge, expertise and experience, and that's contributing to universities and the development of universities to be effective in producing good global citizens, and contributing to the generation of new knowledges. So within the Deakin context, the Universities Australia Indigenous strategy, and particularly the cultural competence framework within that strategy, has been adopted. It's been adopted nationally. It's certainly been adopted by Deakin, and that forms part of the framework for the Indigenous higher education at Deakin agenda, or the agenda, which was formulated in 2016, and it's basically due for renewal this year. So just quoting from that agenda, the agenda at Deakin University, it is a framework for cultural change developed to align with Deakin's Live the Future agenda, which is now in review as well, and profiles our initiatives to embrace improved outcomes for Deakin's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, staff and communities, and to meet existing and as yet unknown challenges. In meeting the challenges of this agenda, we seek to achieve improvement and sustainability across the depth and breadth of our teaching, research and engagement, including recognition and reconciliation for the advancement of all members of Deakin's communities, including staff and students, engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities whom Deakin serves, educational achievement, and research which informs and is informed by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges and cultures. At around the same time, the Deakin employment strategy, or the strategy, was developed within the Deakin context to address disparities in Indigenous employment and meet targets, which are now sort of outlined in the Deakin EA, which I think is under review as well. That's all kind of a period of review and transition, I think. By, for example, actively recruiting and retaining Indigenous staff, improving human resource strategies, supporting academic staff undertaking research programs, developing and delivering cultural competence training as part of Deakin's induction process, amongst many other initiatives. And I think that would be probably due for review as well. So there has been work moving forward. But I also would like to point out that in 2012, Deakin University endorsed Aboriginal knowledge systems at its academic board. And as far as I know, is the only university in Australia to have done so. So I'm just going to address the, on the slide here, inclusive of graduate learning outcomes, which was part of the framework. But I'm going to actually now go to a video.
I think I need to have a sense of other spaces to know my own. Perhaps that which it isn't, to understand that which it is.
You're thinking about ontology again, aren't you?
Yes. How did you know?
We've been friends for a long time, Lucy. I see your questions and your journey. I think it's time you met my Auntie Dawn.
Indigenous ontology?
Yes, not just ways of being, but knowing and doing. It's all interconnected. It can help inform and reshape other frames, Lucy. You need to understand this. This is my friend Lucy, Aunt. She is pondering ways of being and wants to understand Aboriginal perspectives.
I'm on a bit of a search, Auntie Dawn.
Knowing is not always about searching, Lucy. Often it is about paying attention.
More tea, Aunt?
Oh, no thanks, Bub. Before I ask you what you want to know about Aboriginal ways, I ask, what do you think you know?
Thank you for taking time and sharing, Auntie Dawn. I do understand that land is important.
That's right. We and the land are one. Land is central and is part of our country. For us, country is lived and lived in, like our bodies and our parents.
Country is a space where knowledge is learnt, lived, practiced, renewed and regenerated.
The people cannot exist without land, and the land cannot exist without the people. Country hears, smells, takes notice, takes care, is sad, happy. Country knows.
Country is sentient and sapient, Lucy. It is landscape, forms, it is human and more than human.
So it is relational and post-human?
Yes. Everything is connected and equal, animate and inanimate, human and more than human. There is no hierarchy of more or less.
Everything is knowledgeable, Lucy.
Story is both knowledge and a way of transmitting knowledge. It explains, explores, and projects our being.
So this is how you know who you are?
We learn how we fit from outside in.
It is a web of interconnectedness without centre.
What about the dreaming?
We must maintain stories and ceremonies to maintain country. Otherwise, country will not maintain us. These are our responsibilities and roles. It is the dreaming, which is yesterday, today, tomorrow.
Dreaming is the blueprint of life. It is held in story, ceremony, language, practice, country. Being is about space, not time.
Every mob you know has their own dreaming. It is only meant for them.
Self is relational. Knowledge is relational. No one person, place, or thing generates exclusive knowledge.
Only certain stories or knowledges are for certain people. Even for me, and this is decided in the dreaming. It is part of our bigness that we cannot know everything. It is part of our knowledge that we cannot know. It is knowing.
Remember where you've been, Lucy, where you are headed. Think about place. So, Indigenous ontology encompasses country and is inextricably linked and indivisible. It is relational, a web of connection without a centre, and is in a state of perpetual co-becoming. Everything is knowledgeable. Dreaming is the blueprint of life. It is post-human, and knowledge is only knowable when and where it is knowable, but always somewhere. It is known and held.
Yes.
So many frames.
Circles, Lucy, circles.
It's so complex.
This is only the surface.
We need more tea.
We need more tea.
The thing that I really wanted to draw out today was just the idea that knowledge is something that is collective and communal, that not all knowledge is meant for everybody. It's a matter of certain knowledge is meant for certain people. Coming from place, it's place-based, and that it requires everyone coming together to make a whole knowledge. And so it's also about learning self from outside in. And so it's part of this idea of not relationship, but I've actually titled that slide as relationality. So relationality in a nutshell is about or the understanding that all life is intricately connected and interconnected. And so hopefully you're at least able to read some of the references in the video around, assemblages and reassemblages that's constantly moving and circuiting. Everything within country is sentient and sapient, therefore everything is knowledgeable. And that you come from a perspective of being human, you are not more or less than anything else. That all things are equal in that sense, and that it's just about this relationality and this connectivity and interconnection that constantly moves all the time. It's constantly making sense. I wrote a piece earlier this year actually around what it means to lose country, because it's everything within. And it was just in response to the bushfires. And I think I might just read that, particularly given the fact I wasn't sure that I would, but particularly given the fact that unfortunately we didn't have sound today for that video. And I'll just read this as a piece that I wrote earlier, as I said. Loss of country. Please know that country moves beyond landscape, allotment, vista or wildlife, has discrete components. It is also place, ancestors, shadows, mist, bauble, maps, vapour. It is knowledge, ways, forms, spirit, healing, a fluid fixity that is a web of interconnection that assembles, then reassembles, a complex system of systems where everything has its place to teach, feel, show, speak. To lose country is a distinct, messy kind of grief. It is not just a loss of connection to these systems and to place, and so an ever-increasing slippage of understanding of who we are and how we fit. It is not just the loss of sentient, sapient beings and the torture of captive incineration in the instance of the fires where there is nowhere else. It is also a grief of guilt in our irresponsible helplessness, our sense of the abandonment of our cultural obligations to care for country. Without country, we are ungrounded and unbelonging. Without country, we are nothing, and without us, country cannot be. So I'm just hoping that you have that sense of collective knowledge and that coming together, and the importance of community and people as knowledge holders and keepers, and that knowledge is meant for only who it's meant for when it is meant. And so that really very much departs, and this becomes a way of being, or an ontology, or a way of being. It also sort of, it's a complex or a very high order knowledge system where all different kinds of knowledges and knowing are equally valued. And that can include psychic posturing or intuition as well, spiritual understandings and so on. And it is situated, as I pointed out when we were looking at the maps, and it is based upon who should know and when it should be known, who has the right to know, and who should tell where it shouldn't be told, and so on. I mean, we don't have a lot of time today to go into all of that detail, but I just wanted to then lay another sediment down and then come down to the level of talking about the graduate learning outcome 8 within the Deakin context. So some of you may be familiar with the so-called ULOs, which are the Unit Learning Outcomes, which is really about curriculum coherence, and it moves out to the graduate learning outcomes. So it's really the idea of how Deakin, what kind of characteristics, what kinds of things our Deakin graduates, as yourselves, as alumni, would model and be aware of, and so on. So basically, the graduate learning outcome 8 in the Deakin context, and more broadly graduate learning outcomes, as I mentioned, been drawn from the University Australia's framework, and just specifically, which is around the Indigenous strategy, the Universities Australia Indigenous strategy, that all students will encounter and engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural content, as integral components of their course of study. So it can be achieved through embedded learning experiences that engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' knowledges within units. It could be new subjects or new units that mobilise and connect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives with other disciplinary knowledge and skills, or more generalist units that might be available. So previously in the Deakin context, the GLOW 8 was engaging ethically and productively in the professional context with diverse communities and cultures in a global context. So it was kind of around global citizenry, I would suggest. And it's now been changed to engaging ethically and productively in the professional context and with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, as well as diverse communities and cultures in a global context. There's been ongoing consultation with communities, and particularly Aboriginal communities, both within now NIKERI, with our staff, more generally with our students, and also with local communities as well. That's still ongoing. And this consultation has been in terms of how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples would like to see these capabilities grown, specifically at Deakin, and there's been a whole process going through that as well. So that's what we've done. I think it's been going through a formal process as well to be taken up. The goal was to have that commencing in 2020, and I think people are certainly moving towards that as well this year. The other thing I might add is that in 2020, we saw the commencement of the foundational PVC ISI, Indigenous Strategy and Innovation, Professor Mark Rose, who will be responsible for these frameworks in teaching and learning, research and workforce strategies, among other things as well. So he will basically be taking the lead in terms of rounding out and connecting and making coherent a lot of wonderful activity that has occurred in various pockets of the university, and bring that into some kind of alignment and coherence. NIKERI, Ike, and now NIKERI features in the university regulations and has 8 objects. So that sort of comes underneath, and part of that has been advancing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges, representation, and so on throughout the university. So Professor Mark Rose, will oversee that, and so it will really come to a point where it will become a whole of university approach, which is one of the key goals actually of University Australia, and particularly with the Indigenous strategy, that it's a whole of university approach, and this will start to roll out and start to really, I think, be felt, and Deakin will gain a lot of traction here, and I think that this is a really exciting time for Deakin, and particularly with the commencement of Professor Mark Rose as well, and the transition of NIKERI. So we're very, very well poised to continue or to expand our core business, and to really contribute our equity around our knowledges and our know-how and our insights and our histories in contributing rigorously and significantly and positively to the Deakin community. And we're really very excited to be doing so. It's an exciting part of the journey as well. So just really quickly in summary, I just wanted to sort of talk about the idea of reconciliation, which is part of sort of what we're endeavouring to do, and Deakin's very much on board, and just the importance of truth-telling as part of that reconciliation process, and the place of First Nations peoples, because I think it's interesting, this year's NAIDOC theme is always was, always will be. Of course, that refers to always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So it's really about that idea of First Nations, and the idea that I think Nova Peris actually made a reference to it just recently. You know, I think it was around the argument of that contestation around Australia Day and the date, and you know, that kind of fierce debate. And she suggested that you know, Australians are not losing 240 years, but rather gaining 60,000 plus years for wonderful, rich heritage as well. But you know, that said, particularly at the point of colonisation and dispossession, there are truths that are uncomfortable and they are difficult to articulate, but even more so, they are difficult to live. I also just you know, and this is the idea, I think, of talking about truth, and without truth, the past cannot be reconciled at all. And meaningful relationships, as just and equitable, may be inauthentic or tokenistic as well. So it is about moving together and really co-constructing a shared contemporary narrative that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people can actually share, be co-constructing, and I think co-actioning as we move forward together. But the recognition that I think community are the I think what's key, I think finally, is that community must always be the storytellers as well, because it is foundational. I've just sort of highlighted and drawn out the idea of coming together and forming a whole knowledge in that video and as I spoke, and the idea of coming together and that notion of community. And its core, it's really foundational. Communities are the storytellers because they live it, because they have had to live the imposed arguments of others every day, because they are the resilient people that write new narratives as well. So without community as a central guiding core the work of NIKERI, and I think the work of Deakin and beyond, just lacks meaning or traction. And I think it's something to celebrate as we move forward together. And I think that's just about it. I've run out of, not things to say, but I've just run out of time. I'm probably over time by now. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much for such an insightful presentation, Gabrielle. We really appreciate your time today. Please don't forget to follow Deakin Alumni on social media. We're on Facebook and LinkedIn and would love to hear from you. Also, a reminder that Deakin alumni and their direct families are eligible for 15% off postgraduate course fees. Find more information about this great offer at the Deakin Alumni website. We'd love to stay in touch with you in general. Please make sure we have your current contact information so we can invite you to relevant events and more. Your postal address allows us to invite you to events in your area, so please be sure to update that as well. You can submit any feedback about today's webinar to deakinalumni@deakin.edu.au, and a recording of this presentation will be available on our website in around 3 weeks. Thank you again to our presenter, Dr. Gabrielle Fletcher, and thank you to you for participating in today's webinar.